Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening, Planning Policy Commission. Good evening, staff, and good evening, Issaquah residents. Tonight, after our last meeting, this meeting almost feels intimate with so few people here. So everyone will get a lot of talking time. I would like to call the May 26th Planning Policy Commission meeting to order, and it is currently 6:30. Due to the virtual format of today's meetings, like all of our meetings for the last 2 years, I'd like to start by providing some guidelines. We have participants attending by computer and others who may be attending by phone. For all of you, our meeting attendees, speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And if you're having any technical issues, please try joining the meeting using a different device, such as a smartphone or a tablet, or use the call-in information in the meeting invite to call in to the meeting. Having said that, we will begin with attendance. Valerie, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Milligan,
Here.
Commissioner Lewis,
Here.
Commissioner Monahan,
Here.
Commissioner Voice,
Here.
Commissioner Kim,
Here.
and Commissioner Bader has an excused absence. Chair, you have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you, Valerie. And tonight is Valerie's first official meeting as far as staff liaison tonight. So we're excited to have Valerie as part of our small family. I'm going to move on to the second part of the agenda, which is approval of the meeting minutes from our last meeting on May 12th. Are there any corrections to those minutes provided in the agenda packet that you all have received? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Now we move on to our third part of the agenda, which is public comment. As everybody here is fully aware, this is an important part of the process, which also factors into the decisions we make here at the Planning Policy Commission. So members of the public, if you are joining us and wish to make a public comment, what we're looking for is you to please raise your virtual hand. And to do this, please press *3 on your phone, or if you are joined by a computer or smartphone, look for a hand icon. It could vary by device. One option may be go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right-hand corner. And it may also be located under the reactions menu or more menu. And what we're looking for tonight is general public comment. The public hearing has closed, so I do ask anyone who is participating tonight in public comment to please recognize that that portion is closed. I will kindly remind you, if you begin to veer into comments on tonight's deliberations, this is general comments for the Planning Policy Commission. When recognized, I ask that you please unmute your microphone, state your name, speak clearly, and please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. And then when you're done, please mute your microphone. For some reason, if you do not respond after your name or your phone number is called, or your connection is lost, the meeting will need to proceed. You are encouraged to rejoin the meeting if you are able. Valerie, do we have anybody signed up for public comment this evening?
I do not see any raised hands.
Valerie, I see Susan DeVille's hand is raised.
Oh, 1 second, Susan. Susan, you're now a panelist. You can unmute and turn your camera on.
Hello. And I think my video's on. Okay, good. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. I'm a little confused, so I'm going to do my best and you can tell me if I'm veering off. Thank you for allowing the public to speak. I want to talk about something that may be addressing tonight. It's concerning the whiteboard. And I have an ask of everyone. And it does pertain to this evening's discussion, so I'll put it out there. Currently, many items have been added to the whiteboard, especially during the natural environment section without public review or clarification. And I was hoping sometime this evening that the items that were moved to the whiteboard for this particular segment could be reviewed if you feel it's important to do that, fellow commissioners, or yeah, I feel like I'm a commissioner at this point. Excuse me for doing that. And my other ask is going forward before final approval of the first draft, could the whiteboard items for that particular section maybe be listed? The other item that I wanted to ask was if we could clarify if testing is going to be done for the procedures, uses that are being discussed tonight. Meaning, I think before the second draft occurs, and if you all agree, will there be a application test done to go over this process so that we can see if it's clear, concise, and easy to read, which is what our objectives are. I think as we've gone through this process, we could look at little tiny things, but we don't know how the actual process is going to roll out. And I'm hoping that the links will be live by the time we review second draft. And if someone could clarify that publicly, I would appreciate it. If these can't be followed up today, maybe we could do it in the future. Thanks you guys for listening. Bye-bye.
Are there any other folks that would like to speak? It does not look like there's anyone else.
Great, thank you, Valerie. Continuation of public hearing for Title 18, zoning and uses updates. So this is the meat of our agenda tonight, and we're going to be deliberating the portion of the public hearing from our last meeting. I'm hoping that most of your clarifying questions have already been answered, whether from the last meeting or through email to staff, and instead looking for policy questions tonight. And then obviously getting to talk about it amongst ourselves towards the end of each presentation. As we did on May 12th, we're going to start with the permitted uses and specified use standards, and then move to form and intensity, and conclude with subdivisions. We're going to deliberate each topic after they're presented. And Kristen is our first presenter this evening. So Ms. Leeson, please take it away.
Oops. There we go. All right, you all can see me? Or the presentation at least?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Sorry, I'm fixing my other screen so I can actually see you. Okay, there we go. So yes, tonight we are doing deliberations on Title 18, Bucket 3, zoning permitted uses, specified use standards, form and intensity, and subdivisions. However, Lucy and I, who will be talking about this section, are only talking about the first four: zoning permitted uses, form and intensity, and specified use standards, because they are so intertwined. So I'm going to start with zone. Actually, here's how they are intertwined. We have zones as a reminder. What is the purpose of each zone? What are standards that go across the zones? Then we have permitted uses. What uses can go in what zones, and what zones will allow what uses? Form and intensity, what do they look like? How high can the buildings be? How close can they be to the sidewalk? How dense? And then specified use standards, which are standards that are specific to actual uses. They don't go across zones, it's a specific use. So it's a fine line. No, it can be a little confusing, but that's how we divided it up. So as a reminder, we consolidated 5 existing zones. We did IMC 1806 zoning districts, 1807 development and design standards, 19A and B, 19A central standards, chapter 4 specifically, and then 19B and C, which are the Issaquah Highlands and Talus replacement regulations. I want to talk about the first two, zoning and permitted uses, kind of combine those, and just hit some of the highlights again, just as a reminder for those who may not have been here last time. The zoning changes highlights. We did not change zoning descriptions at all. However, there were no descriptions that were included in the Issaquah Highlands and Talus replacement regulations, so we added descriptions for those. We added clarity for allowed uses in each zone. The retail zone was removed because we don't have it anymore. Once we did Central Issaquah, the retail zone went away. Most of it became mixed use. And we relocated several footnotes and sections from permitted uses and form and intensity to zones. So for example, permitted uses, there were several footnotes underneath on each page, and it might under there have a description for, oh, now I'm gonna have to think about ADUs and how those are supposed to work, but that should really be in zones. Or there was this description about how if you are located in the CBD and on Front Street, then you had to have ground floor commercial, and here's what it had to look like. So that would go into zones or specified use zones. So the highlights for the changes in permitted uses was that we combined 4 different use tables out of 4 different chapters. And the difficulty here was that some uses that are actually the same use had different names. So it may look like some uses were removed from a zone, but really they weren't. The name just changed because they're actually the same thing. We removed the levels of review. So if it used to say in there P1 for level 1 review, P3 for level 3 review, permitted level 3 review. And we removed that and just put in P's to say it's permitted. We did not intentionally add or remove any uses from zones. So admittedly, that's something that we need to go back and just double check because 4 different tables, 4 different names, we need to check it again. And the 2 exceptions, as I mentioned last time, we did remove bike stations because the way that the bike share programs work now, you no longer need the big stations that you used to have. So we removed that, and the state doesn't do emissions testing anymore. So we removed the emissions testing. We also removed the individual retail uses. We kept retail as a broad category, and we're going to rely on the we're going to improve the improve the definition of retail so that we can have criteria for what meets retail. But the retail uses change so often, and things come and go, and it just evolves, and we can't possibly continue to keep a list of every retail use. And lastly, we moved footnotes, as I mentioned before, some of the footnotes to either reference and notes on the right-hand side of the table so that you know where to go to look for special standards, or we moved it to zones or special use standards and then referred to it. Some of the comments that were made, there weren't any policy questions that we had associated with these. And some of the things that came up were to ensure consistency in language between what was there and what is now. And I know mineral resources came up, so that's one that we need to relook at. Remove replication in the tables. Sometimes it was listed in 3 different places. We need to fix that, make sure it's in one place, or just make sure it's clear. Ensure all the references are included. So all the references may not be there yet. So once this is done, we need to go back and make sure that all references to all different sections of the code are included. We need to cross-check and verify permitted uses consistency. So as I mentioned, 4 tables, we just need to make sure that we didn't inadvertently delete something or add something. And it came up several times to confirm lakeside properties and zoning. So for the fun of it, I put a map together. Hopefully this will help you all. So this is lakeside. Everything that you see in the orange, the stripes, and the gray is currently owned by Lakeside. They used to own a big parcel over here, but they sold it, and it's now View Apartments. So the underlying zoning for most of the entire thing is actually mineral resources. And this part is still mineral resources in accordance with the development agreement. This part is an urban village lakeside overlay, which is where they are anticipated to do their more urban development. This parcel down here is zoned intensive commercial, and there's a house here, and there are 2 buildings here where they do industrial uses. I think that might be where they do some of their gravel operations. They were annexed to the city. It is state law that we were required to allow them to continue these uses. So that ordinance was adopted in 1999, and then in 2012, we did the development agreement, and that is how this wound up looking like this. So I think there was some confusion in kind of how that works. So hopefully that helps clear it up. And that is all I have for me. So Lucy, I don't know, Lucy's next. And I don't know if you all are going to talk about it now or wait. And if you, and Lucy, I can certainly keep this PowerPoint up here if you'd like me to.
What's staff's opinion? Should Lucy go next? On my notes, it shows me breaking down, moving to deliberation, but I know, like you said, these are intertwined. I don't think there's heavy feelings either way, just which way would help it flow better.
I think these are short enough, in my personal opinion. These topics, they are intertwined, and I know that neither one of us has a real long presentation, so I would imagine that you all could just go through the whole thing and then deliberate.
And then just you do the subdivisions separately.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. Lucy, are you ready to present?
Sure. Valerie, could I have you switch to being a presenter?
Yes, you sound like a robot.
Is that better?
Not quite.
Well, unfortunately, I can't restart, and that's all I've got.
Okay.
Sorry.
You're now a presenter.
Thank you. Sorry that you're going to get robot voice.
I'm just going to step in here. Would it help if we just stopped and deliberated with questions because of the technical issues? Would it help, Lucy, if you were to turn off your computer and reboot? I mean, we could do it that way because you are coming across as a robot.
Uh, yes, that's fine. I will restart and be back.
Okay. So I guess we'll stick to the original script. I get Planning Policy Commission, you're up. Looking for policy questions and deliberations on Kristen's presentation.
Chair, you're muted.
Takes a village sometimes. Vice Chair Monahan with a question.
Yeah, hey, Kristen, not a policy question. I'm wondering if you could bring us into the belly of the beast and describe kind of how this cross-referencing is going on. Is it like a beautiful mind? We've got a bunch of papers up in a conference room somewhere in City Hall. I'd just like a little bit of an insight into the process because I can only imagine the bear that this is to making sure this section cross-references this section and we're not deleting, and just a little bit describing the process for us.
I appreciate that this is a bear, because it is. So we started I went through every single one of the footnotes that was there and would talk to, kind of sent them to and would talk to Stephen and Lucy, who were doing the other two sections, and say, hey, this is a footnote. This needs to go in one of your sections. Where does it go? And then I'd find out where it was, and they'd put it there, and we put the note in the reference. So that's kind of how it's going, but I know that we're not done yet because we still have revisions. So I think what we'll have to do, that's how we've started it. And a couple of things have come up on their end when they say, we probably need to put a reference in there for this thing that, we added or moved to this section. And I think it's just going to be a continuous back and forth. And really more now, it's going to be the other way. It's going to be looking at the zone section and at the specified uses section and making sure that we have references. Because I've pulled out all the references from the permitted uses. So now we're going to have to work backwards the other way. Yeah, with a fine tooth comb.
Understood. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Commissioner Milligan with a comment.
Hey, well, first process question. I think you said questions and deliberations, jump in. And then we're going over two sections. I'm sorry about my mic. Zoning and uses. And just as an example, I have about 1, 2, 3, 4 items to talk about in these two categories. Should we take an item and then go back to the end of the line and cycle through, or should I run through all my things that I wanted to talk about?
Would everybody like to do policy questions first and then do a deliberation?
You have to ask a yes or no question or else we can't answer.
Would everybody like to do that? That's a yes or no. I'm getting a big thumbs up. So we'll do questions first.
Questions first. Okay. Well, I don't have any questions, so just have comments. Okay. Bye.
Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Boyce. All right, questions on zoning, policy questions, and I'm really excited to see what NIDA brings to the table. I love a 4-point process. Can you remind me, first of all, I'm going to add in a comment and tell you, Kristen, that I do really enjoy our permitted use table much better than when I used it before. User experience so far, I appreciate it better. Can you remind me on daycare operations and dry cleaning and pressing shops have no permitted uses in the table and have notes to other places in the IMC? Can you remind me for the user experience how that's going to work? Is it going to be like a drop link? Is it going to be?
Once we're done, we get it into code publishing, we will have links in there.
Okay.
We'll also still have the reference, so if anybody just wants to go look it up, they can, but we will have links.
Thank you. My other policy question is on draft part 4 zoning 18.400, and I'm looking at page 6 of 30. I'm going to read out what the point is. It's D2, but it's to encourage the reuse and remodeling rather than the demolition of historic buildings to provide alternative housing opportunities. And I want to call out this policy because it's incredibly important, and we've been working on this for so many years. My question specifically is about the use of the words historic building and alternate housing. Are those defined?
We've, oh, good, I'm unmuted. We were just looking at that, and in a section we're working at now, realized that historic structure is not defined technically. If you're a landmark, you have to be 40 years old or older. So that may wind up being, I don't know what the definition will be, but if you're looking at landmarks, that's what it is. So,
Okay. It jumped out to me as when we talk a lot about aging in place and the different crossover of policy to code, this stood out to me as a really important one. And I just wanted to make sure that we were really putting in our intent in a way to be able to get that meaningful result. It's a good example of where sometimes our language is not necessarily ambiguous, but it also doesn't maybe get us to where we want it to be. So I was just curious about those definitions and how we were going to kind of frame the word historic, right? I think it can be a little bit loaded. And so I was trying to figure out how we were going to do about that. So thank you for putting a flag in that for me.
yeah. Did you have a question about alternate? You had something about alternate?
It's for alternate, and for alternate housing opportunities. I didn't know if the word alternate housing was also, if that term was going to be defined, if it was a way that we were going to be talking about. Maybe there was definitions that we're going to be talking about ADUs, or you know what I mean, how to be able to take an existing property, single family home, and be able to use it in different housing opportunity way. You know what I mean? So that's what was a second definition in that point too, that I thought had some interesting give.
So yeah, I don't think alternate housing, and look, we're looking way far ahead, and I don't think alternate housing will be defined, but I think we'll say, here are forms of alternate housing, and then you have all the different definitions of what those are.
I like that. Thank
Okay.
you.
You're welcome.
All right, Commissioner Milligan. Deliberation time.
I don't even have to put it in the queue. Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Nina Milligan here. Thank you. Hey, I wanted to start this evening with some general comments. that I hope will help explain my specific comments. And first of all, I want to thank the staff again. We don't do that, and I don't do that enough. They're doing a fabulous job, and this is a and I know that my contributions are quite limited. I depend on the fabulous comments that the public. I'm not even trying to um, amplify their voices because their voices are so clear and capable. Really appreciate all the contributions that the public. And just want to say that in the comments that I make tonight, really any night, and I don't have a pen anymore, but that's okay. There are just a few that I think are particularly of interest to me and that I've had more experience in. And that,
Excuse me, Commissioner Milligan,
Commissioner Milligan?
yes, ma'am.
would you mind turning off your camera? Because you keep cutting out and I'm wondering if it might help.
Yeah, maybe. And tell me again, Kristen, if it does cut out, and I'll just to get rid of this headset. I was hoping it was an improvement. Is this working okay?
It is, you haven't cut out since you did that. Thank you.
Okay, hey, excellent. Let's do it this way then. Okay, so my point was that my comments are focused on a few things. I'm depending on the capable staff and the public to cover a lot of things. It's just way too much for one commissioner. But in the zoning and uses category, the best actor is. No, what I wanted to talk about has to do with, I'm following up on Joy's comment earlier about reuse and remodeling to limit the demolition of properties. That's the first thing I want to talk about, and that is compatible with preserving our neighborhood character. I had wondered why uh, any of the rest of the sentences there, why just historic properties? If one of our objectives is to preserve neighborhood character and to be sustainable and a low waste community, why wouldn't we um, encourage the reuse and remodeling rather than the demolition of properties in general? So I just wanted to add that reflection back on that comment. And then in the way that Article 2 and Article 3 relate to one another, when you go into the standards in Article 3, and I brought this up last meeting, the standards refer um, to housing that or residential that doesn't have an architecture review or other residential standards, you know, like the like Old Town or the urban villages, but it focuses on duplexes, cluster, multifamily. And the reason I asked this question last time is that I thought, why does it not apply? Why do not these standards apply to single family zones and single family in general? When we're talking about preserving neighborhood character, when we're talking about encouraging reuse and remodeling, the the standards below in Article 3 could apply to all residential zones. And I throw that out there as kind of a challenge. You guys can push on that. It's in alignment with Goal 8 of the Council to retain charm and distinctive character. There are a number of items in Article 3 that are helpful even in our single family zones. So if you guys could look at that and check me on that and see if I'm going the right way. And Chair Voice, those are all the comments I have about the zoning section. Do you want me to continue into uses, or do you want me to wait and see if somebody else wants to talk about zoning?
No, I think we'll just stick with continuing on, and then we'll bring you back.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, and this is good because I can put these things out and my fellow commissioners can push back on me. This is kind of a question, but or maybe I'm just proofreading. Under uses, live work units, especially directing this to Lucy. I wasn't sure if this was correct because live work units are allowed in the urban village not in the single family one. They're allowed along Park Drive, but when I look at a zoning map, which we weren't given a new zoning map. The only zoning map I have is the one that's on the website. So I need some help on this to make sure that the live work units, especially in Issaquah Highlands, are still allowed. So I'll throw that out there. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is and I want to thank Anne for sending in comprehensive plan goals for us when we are talking about um, oh God, now I don't have it in front of me, but land use N3 and 01 call for commercial uses or small scale. God, I wish I could read that to you right now. In our residential, when you look at the use table, a couple uses like deli and small scale grocers and cafes would satisfy land use N3 and land use 01. Again, push back people, but that's what I was thinking might satisfy that comprehensive plan goal. And then the last thing in use is self-storage. And the reason I'm bringing this back up is because there has been such a controversy, and this is an opportunity for us to align our goals with the use table. And just summarizing and catching just high points of very in-depth conversations that this commission has had about self-storage in the past, that self-storage does not contribute to the vibrancy of a neighborhood. It doesn't contribute jobs. It doesn't help with the economy. And yet we have them allowed in mixed use along all the eastern side of Gilman and in urban villages in the commercial retail and in the mixed use retail sections. And if what we're trying to build is a vibrant community, to allow self-storage to be in these areas, I think is contrary to our comprehensive plan goals. One idea, if you do allow them, maybe you could put a use standard that the ground floor has to be a retail use, like we do sometimes in for other uses or other oh God, now I can't even think of the words. But anyway, that would be one way of solving it. I think the ideal way is to limit the areas where it is allowed in the city of Issaquah. If we can't do that, then let's add a standard that at least ground floor is a retail or commercial use. That's it, Chair Voice. Thank you very much for letting me go on. That's my biggest section, by the way.
Thank you, Commissioner Milligan. Fantastic comments, particularly liked the last comment. So now we're going to move on to Vice Chair Monahan.
Joy, were you in front of me?
Please go right ahead. I don't mind going after.
Okay, I'm happy to go second. Yeah, I guess I did agree with the last comment on self-storage, and I'm more than happy to be shouted down by my fellow commissioners. But the way I'm viewing my role tonight, and sort of throughout this process, is a little bit more limited in that we're consolidating. As I said before, I compare this to Beautiful Mind. Like, so much is going into just consolidating and harmonizing that role is enough at this point. And although I think there are very good policy discussions we can have on various aspects of the code, I see that somewhat outside the scope of what we're doing here today. Instead, it's, to the extent there are contradictions that need to be addressed, which I think happens in the subdivision section later on, right? There, we need to call a ball or a strike. Okay, which one are we going to do? Because, this code says A, this code says B, which one are we going to do going forward? I think in these sections where, and I fully trust staff, I think you're going to do it. Like, they both say A, but they say A a little bit differently. So we're going to try to make it sound A in both languages. Peace, like, that's fine. Let's check the box. And then once we get this thing done and this this plane landed, then we can start kicking the tires and making changes here and there. So at least I see this as, if there is a contradiction, we obviously need to discuss it, and we need to give guidance to the staff of, okay, we want A, not B, or B, not A. But at least in sections where the goal is just a consolidation and essentially a restatement of everything that's in codes everywhere, again, I see my role a little bit more limited in just making sure that I understand the process. I understand how we're identifying. I think we called it a gaps analysis, where there are gaps or where there are contradictions. And then where there are those gaps or there are those contradictions, I'm more than happy to weigh in on my no expert opinion. I'm happy to provide that. But at least at this point, I'm not going, I don't feel comfortable enough making policy judgments on sections that, I can read the words, but I really don't understand the issues because we really haven't had the time to really dive into them. So that's at least how I'm viewing my role, at least for the first, I believe, 4 sections that really just have a consolidation aspect to it. So thank you.
Thank you. And apologies, Commissioner Lewis. I missed you. But now, go
No
ahead.
worries, Chair Voice. Commissioner Joy Lewis here. Um, Before I get to my comments on what we're looking at right now, I do want to make 2 other comments. And we had Susan made a comment during public discussion about the whiteboard, and I do want to address that because I think that it goes to Nina's point about storage, and that is to say that I know that staff is making excellent notes about comments that we're making, and I know I've requested and staff has confirmed that we will be having a meeting to discuss the whiteboard. I think there's been a decision that we're not going to do it at every single bucket. We're going to go through our first draft. We're going to plow through some good headway. And it's my understanding that we're going to come back and we will have a meeting with public comments about the whiteboard. And so to let people know that that is coming, it's just not what we're doing tonight. And Nina's comments are right on. And I think it's very apt when we do talk about the whiteboard to talk about timeframes, right? Being able to say, when do we want this to be addressed by staff? Like, we get that it's not part of this current Title 18 update, but where should we advise that it fall on the scale of things? And that's where I think that kind of where storage be allowed is a great discussion for that conversation. I really appreciate Matt's comments cheerleading tonight, because when he says it, I think a lot of us go, yes, right? We see this incredible amount of work and we see that the lift that's happening. But I do think there's a little bit more than harmonizing that's happening. Right now, we want to be really talking about how policy continuity is happening in our code, and we really want to be talking about a modernization that's happening. A lot of these sections have not been looked at for decades. They've been ported over, and what we want to make sure that is that we're not limiting ourselves uh, right now when we do have the opportunity to do it, because this Title 18 lift is not going to happen every single year. And typically, how PPC operates is to look at very finite sections and chunks of code. And so to be able to have this overarching view is tremendously important. And I'm going to segue that into some comments I have about Article 6 for community resources and zones. I think this section here is page 18 of 30 for those that are following a packet of 1840 zones. Right now we have language about conservancy and recreation, and I think that this is an opportunity to be adding and strengthening language about the reduction of chemicals, being able to align our policies to the climate action plan, and to really be talking about larger language goals about reducing our impact on the environment. Right here is where we are able to do that, where we're able to put that language in. I really think that it's missing right now from updates that we need to have. And I would hope that we would come together as a commission and say that these sections can be strengthened, that a little bit more can be done in these two, 18400 .180 as well as 18400.170 to really be able to tie in some of the new policies that we've all been working so hard on, many boards and commissions. I also think that there's an opportunity to be re-examining some of the language that we use. I'm looking about maintenance of land, vacant and uninhibited commercial properties may be maintained to remove litter, garbage, and yard waste and control noxious and destructive plants. I can think of a lot of places right now that are within city control where that is not happening. And we need to think about the accountability that we have of our partners in the community and also of the city. And so we need to be thinking about how we apply the code to ourselves and being able to hold the administration to a high standard. And there's a couple places in this section where we talk about what we expect, but are we really doing it for ourselves? And I think it's incredibly important that we have language that really holds ourselves to the same standards, similar to the way that we've talked about right away, and being able to have similar standards of road maintenance, I think is something that we can have kind of across the board as well. Um, in some places, I will say that we have some language issues. I look at multifamily standards for residential zones. Point 6 tells us to ensure a multifamily is a desirable component of mixed-use development and must be encouraged. And I can't tell you how many times I've been frustrated by words like must be encouraged. I think that it leaves a lot of ambiguity, and I really hope that we're able to fine tune some of these things, because here in our zones is where we really have the teeth and we're able to say what our expectations are in different places of the city. So I really do want to echo the comments that Commissioner Monahan made. This is a huge improvement to what we had, and I do think that there are a lot of amazing things that we can carry on, and I look forward to seeing some of the fine tooth happenings as we go on to the next draft. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you. Look like we'd come around the circle again. I want to make a couple clarifying comments about the things I'd said before and thank my fellow commissioners for their comments as well. What I was pointing to in Article 3 about standards is that we have all these design standards written in there for the benefit of the communities that don't, the neighborhoods that don't have design standards, and yet they only apply to multifamily or duplexes. And the objective is, much of our objectives is to maintain distinctive character in our neighborhoods, and it's just inconsistent. I think it is a housekeeping matter to address this in a way that doesn't just apply a standard to a very unique set of residential. So for instance, where it's 18.400.1010 duplex and attached single family house standard, townhouse standards, these standards could apply to all residential. It could just be residential standards. I think most of these would apply. And they refer to things like resembling the character, style, and modulation of a single family unit, resembling and being consistent with the time period in which a majority of the homes in the surrounding neighborhood were built. Well, wouldn't this be important in a place like South Cove or on Squawk Mountain, where there is a neighborhood character, a distinctive neighborhood character, and you know this phrase from other parts of our objectives and goals. Why do we only apply this to duplexes and townhouses? So I come back to this as a housekeeping matter. And then I hate it when people refer to something with an acronym or with a letter and a number. So I'm going to read to you the reason why I was talking about uses, namely delis or small scale groceries and cafes, to allow them in some way in residential um, zones, because LUN3 says allow for neighborhood hubs and mixed use developments containing small scale commercial, retail, and office uses in residential areas that are intended to serve the neighborhood residents. This is in our comprehensive plan, but it's not in the table. That's why I brought it up, not to change things, but just what we're trying to do is implement the comprehensive plan in the table. And the other one was land use policy 01, which says encourage a well-distributed system of commercial uses that serve the needs of residential neighborhoods. These aren't putting in a big grocery store somewhere. Serve the needs of residential neighborhoods, workplaces, and the greater Issaquah community, and are more easily accessible via non-motorized travel. This is one of the things that's been frustrating for our satellite neighborhoods that were created during car-dependent land uses. Squawk Mountain, South Cove, they're stranded. They don't really get to do anything unless they get in their car. And the land use table doesn't allow for the implementation of these, particularly these two policies in our comprehensive plan. So I just wanted to flesh that out a little better than I did at first. Thank you, Chair Voice. Well done.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Voice. Since I'm sure staff is tallying for our report back to council, I just want to second the comments that that Nina just made. I think she did an eloquent job stating them, so I won't restate them, but I just want to voice my approval with what she said. Thank you.
Is there anyone who else would like to speak on this particular topic? I'll just briefly mention the commissioners, all of them. Of course, this is a fantastic group. Being honest, I have always come at this more of the mindset as Vice Chair Monahan as a big cleanup operation, and it is a heavy lift. And I understand that staff is just the timetable alone to have a year um, is difficult. It's a difficult undertaking. However, Commissioner Milligan and Commissioner Lewis being so persuasive as they are, I do think whenever there's something conflicting, which often there is when these things are consolidated, it is an opportunity. And everything that the two of them have mentioned tonight, I think are opportunities to improve the code. But I also, again, look at this more of a cleanup operation, and I don't want to get too bogged down on complete and different policy changes. I know some of the feedback we've gotten for the public who sometimes question whether or not we read these things, which we do. Sometimes are questioning why we're not going much more drastic, much more heavy-handed, implementing things as I'm sure everybody would want to see. But again, that's not the view that I've ever taken as far as what we've been tasked with doing. There are some out goals that the council has asked us to look at, but to Matt's point, and again, I agree, we kind of need to land the plane, then we can start kicking tires. And again, I'm not someone who's looking for a perfect draft. I'm looking for a good draft, a great draft, and the opportunity to make amendments once a year. But I do think, like I said, as far as Commissioner Lewis and Commissioner Milligan, everything they made were, I don't think those are heavy lifts. And again, whenever it's conflicting, I think we should take the opportunity. Would anybody else like to comment on this part of this evening's agenda? Staff, have you gotten what you needed?
Yes, I think I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see that we have Ms. Sloman has returned. So I'm sure she's ready to go with her presentation. So
I blame
please.
Commissioner Monahan, who wanted a technical, he said every meeting needs a technical blip. And my computer decided to do a major upgrade. So thank you.
Sound good now.
You're welcome.
Good. I'm relieved. So I am sharing my screen. Can you see it? Happy to hear I don't sound like a robot anymore. Okay, I'm taking over for the next two groups. I'll go through form and intensity and then let me know if you want to discuss there or if I should go through both groups and then we discuss again. So the highlights of the changes made to form and intensity, we consolidated tables from multiple codes. We reconciled standards from the former urban villages, Issaquah, Highlands, and Tallis with Central Issaquah, where we found similar types of standards that were inconsistent that applied to multiple neighborhoods. The lower standard was adopted. We added new standards for odd lots, mostly regarding which side is front, side, or rear. And we changed AAS processes to more narrowly defined deviations. There weren't a lot of comments on form intensity. Most of them were around edits that we will review and incorporate with the consolidated draft. The 2 points I would make, one is that some of the comments related to policy changes, which as we've discussed, we're not making unless they're related to goals and outcomes. So for instance, minimum FAR requirements in Issaquah Highlands or community facilities wouldn't be part of this process. That can be I like to think we're assembling the airplane and then we can figure out how to fly it. So I think that's a flying activity. And but to Chair Voice's point, we do have to reconcile differences. And one of the examples that came up is structured parking and whether it counts or not towards FAR. different definitions in different parts of the city, and that's one of the things that will have to get reconciled and a decision made about which approach is used, and that will be a change. So that's all on form and intensity. Do you want me to continue with specified use standards?
Yes, please.
So the highlights of specified use standards, 1807 is a massive chapter in the existing code, and we broke it into two parts. Some of it went to form the zoning chapter, and some of it went to form the specified uses that we're talking about now. Please note this is a correction from the memo. We didn't say zoning there. I think we said permitted uses. We are trying to, we added specifics related to some design requirements for areas that are outside of neighborhoods that have architectural standards or HOAs. Some elements that are in 1807 got moved to other chapters, which you'll see in the final bucket. Residential mixed use was removed because we felt that it was covered by other sections, and outdoor recreation was focused on private facilities. It was unclear exactly what it applied to, so we focused it to private facilities. In terms of some of the comments, one of the things that one of the DC commissioners had commented about retail or production. We do have both are separately identified in the permitted uses table, but one of the questions that came up was whether in the specified use standards, whether those applied to retail or production. It seems to me that it applies to retail, but we're going to clarify that in the consolidated draft. There was also some questions around adult entertainment and what fell into it, and are there certain activities that are missing? And in researching that, what I noticed is adult entertainment is actually regulated not by Title 18, but by Title 5, which is entitled Licensing and Operation of Adult Entertainment Facilities. And the limitations section that I think brought up these questions about what is and isn't covered is actually a duplication from Title 5, and so should be removed from Title 18 because it's just not good code writing to have things in two places. And Title 18 is only supposed to address location and siting. So we'll clean that up in the consolidated draft. And then the other comment that I wanted to touch on is an example of when we expand standards citywide. There was a comment about automobile service stations and intensive convenience being prohibited within 300 feet of daycare and or schools. And I think the point, one of the things that we struggle with, as Kristen mentioned, there are just untold number of footnotes in the code right now. And what we've tried to do is pull the footnotes out and actually make them standard so that it's much easier to find them, to apply them, make sure we've got them in the right place. The genesis for the standard on automobile service stations and intensive commercial comes from footnotes that apply to commercial zones. And so we added them as standards. I put the exact language in here. Some of them apply only to certain kinds of schools and not other kinds of schools. I think that what we're trying to do is carry these things forward, but I think if the commission has some policy direction about whether this is the right way to handle these footnotes that we're pulling out, it would be great to hear from you. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. All right, commissioners, time to do our thing. Commissioner Milligan.
Nah, Commissioner Lewis beat me to it. I saw her. I don't have my camera on, so she couldn't see whether I
Did she?
Lewis. Yeah, she beat me.
Right under the radar. Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Voice. I want to make a quick comment, Lucy, to your last question and tell you that unfortunately, a little bit of my answer is predicated on how we see it, right? One thing that we've kind of been talking about is user experience. And so part of it is when it's printed out, obviously it's not going to be how people are actually interacting in it. So being able to see how footnotes will look will be a little bit about you guys coming back to us and giving us that kind of experience, that kind of testing situation that we've all been kind of dancing around. It's going to be a little bit easier for me to comment on it once we kind of see this compilation of how am I interacting and using the code. So I know that's not quite the answer that you want, but at this point, I'm going to trust you guys to say we're pulling in all these things. I very much like that the permitted use table does not have all the footnotes. I think that's a huge cleanup, and I really appreciate that. So as you guys bring us along this next future round, right, and be able to say, hey, this is now how we're recommending we move through and interact in the code. I think it's going to be an important component. And I want to thank you for your presentation because you cleared up a lot of questions that I have, and I really appreciate the follow up. So thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, Chair Voice. This is Commissioner Nina Milligan. I don't have prepared comments here, but the first thing I need to say is that I think I snuck in use standards into the last section. Sorry for being out of order. But then I was inspired to be helpful, Lucy, because I love this kind of thing. If it is helpful, that last part about automobile and things around schools, uh, looking at it that direction inspired me, or I thought of the what else do we do like this, like recreational marijuana. So couldn't we simplify what sort of things aren't near schools and libraries or whatever, and turn it that way and say there's a number of things that we do not allow within a 300-foot radius of a school, and they are these, rather than the direction that you're going. Maybe that'll make it simpler and shorter. So that's all. Thank you. Thank you for the good work.
Great suggestions. Commissioner Monahan.
Yeah, hi, Matt Monahan. I just want to second Joy's comments on the footnotes and similarly express my appreciation for their demise. So thank you and good work.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Would anyone like to speak on this topic that hasn't or would like to again? All right, well, thank you, Ms. Sloman. Appreciate the presentation. Thank you all for the discussion. And I believe Minnie is up with our last presentation of this evening, subdivisions. Ms. Dollywall.
Good evening, everyone. So I'll quickly share my screen once I have permission. Looks like,
You should be a presenter now.
yes, see that? Thank you. So, see. So I'm going to quickly highlight some of the changes that we sort of talked about at our last meeting. So in your proposed draft, we've added a design standard section. It addresses street connections, block size requirements, designing with the topography. We talked about open space requirements based on our discussion with the natural amenity space before, that we're going to do some more research in terms of what the space requirements need to be with subdivisions, because we talked about multifamily development, but when it's a separate lot, single family development, what those space requirements need to be. We've added the unit lot subdivision process. So this facilitates fee simple ownership of townhomes. We've added specific criteria for different types of platting: short plat, preliminary plat, lot line adjustment, because the criteria didn't exist before, or it wasn't for each one separately. There wasn't any process for lot consolidation, but they were processed similar to a lot line adjustment. So we've called them out explicitly. The expiration and extensions were unlimited. Someone could ask for an extension forever in 1 year increments, which created a little bit of false, that those could go on forever. But theoretically, we could just deny them after each year. So instead of that, we've added each preliminary plat or short plat is good for 5 years. To get your final plat done, but you can ask for 1 year increment extensions for 3 additional years, so a maximum of 8, as opposed to unlimited. The code wasn't really very clear about deferred improvements and bonding. So between the preliminary plat, someone could theoretically bond all their utility work and all their streets and go strictly straight away to the final plat. That's not the intent of the state law. So we've made that clear that you can't build your homes until all your improvements are built on the ground. And so, but some flexibility for deferring improvements like the final paving of the road, because it can get sometime torn up while you're doing home construction and things like that. So limited amount of deferral, but you need to get all your utilities and your infrastructure in place before you can build your homes. There was no process or criteria for modification, so we put that in there. We're going to continue to look at this for some guidance from the state law to really make it clear between modification of a preliminary plat versus a final plat, and who is authorized to make that decision. So this may need a little bit more work, but there's a section added in there. There was no option for phasing, although phasing has occurred, and so we're trying to add some clarity around how phasing is going to be approved and what the criteria for that is going to be. The final plats in your draft are listed as will be considered an administrative decision. The state law was changed to allow this because the final plat, the work really is a very technical check of everything that was approved under the preliminary plat. It's already been signed off and inspected. All your infrastructure and utility works have already gone through an inspection, and final plat is confirming that all of those conditions have been carried through, and the final lot lines are then recorded. So that's the highlight of the changes. There was some discussion about what was the intent of some of these changes. So goal 13 that came from the council's adopted discussed goals and outcomes chart. So there was discussion about what issue is it with the subdivisions. There was some talk about how outside of Issaquah, Highlands, Talus, and the subdivisions section hasn't been updated since a couple of decades. The objective was to incorporate a more recent design criteria and such. And the intended outcome was that the subdivisions are well designed and they provide guidance on street connections, garage locations, and relationship to the street. Some of that is going to come from your building design section, because in subdivision, you're really talking about the layout, lot layout, and not the building design. But where you get access to your homes is sort of addressed during the subdivision stage. And so what we've proposed at this time is a design section for short plats and preliminary plats. There was some comments about the maximum block size, whether that should be limited to certain sections or areas of the city. There's also a section on zero lot line, shared access, and alley access. So, more judicious use of valuable land, and there are ways to kind of use your land, not waste land for areas that aren't going to be that well used. So there's that section. The language is still encouraged and, not sort of like required, but the code allows some of those things. So we're looking for PPC to discuss this design section and, one, whether you want to limit it to certain parts of the city and whether these requirements should be mandatory or encouraged. And if encouraged, then we'll move them into the intent and purpose section. Again, we've included all the detailed public comments in the matrix, but some of the highlights were, again, related to this design section: block length, alley access, shared access, zero lot line, sort of things. So we included these questions in our previous packet. So I'll read them out here as you deliberate. The first one is, do the proposed design requirements for plat layout, including the block length, adequately address the community's desired goals and outcomes? Or do you want to limit them to certain, areas that like Issaquah, Highland, Talus, and Central, and not apply them citywide, like Squawk Mountain and South Cove and those neighborhoods? And the second question is, the section that we've included about the alley access, shared access, do you want to see any changes in that section? Do you also want to limit those in certain parts of the city? The open space and recreation space requirements, multifamily versus single family, should they be different? And if so, then we'll come back with more details on what our peer city standards are, what makes sense in Issaquah's context, and such. So at this time, we're just asking if those should be different and what additional research would help you make an informed decision on what that standard should be. The last question is, a process question, but we're throwing it in here because we're talking subdivisions. So right now, the city's processes up to 4 lots is considered a short plat. Anything more than 4 is considered a subdivision. And the process for subdivision is, you need SEPA for more than 4 lots, 5 or more, but you also require a public hearing at a preliminary plat stage, and then a final plat hearing. So the question really is, should that threshold be increased from 4 to 9 lots? And lastly is a catch-all question, have you captured everything that you think? What if you're missing anything? So that's it for my presentation. I can leave this on the slide or I can take it off.
Any preference as far as leaving it up? I think you could probably take it down. Leave it up? All I can see is one cube, so that's the only reaction I got. All right, well, thank you, Ms. Dollywall. Appreciate the presentation. Vice Chair Monahan.
Hey, so I have comments on 3 and 4, but it looks like both Nina and Joy have questions, so I'm going to reserve comment until they ask their questions.
Yeah, I think with all these, I don't know if we want to take them one by one, but at least we'll start with the questions. So, Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, Chair Voice. I have just a few questions. One has to do with, well, I have 2 questions about lot consolidation. Where would lot consolidation be allowed? And what was the reason to add it at this time? And then I have another question about subdivision.
Sure. So lot consolidation can occur anywhere in the city. It's basically if you have, the law pattern in some old parts of town occurs over hundreds of years. So you could have a line, someone, back in the day, it used to be really skinny lots too. So the lots can vary in different shapes and sizes and all that. So if you have contiguous ownership of these lots, you can eliminate those lot lines now under the code. It just didn't have a process as to how they would be reviewed or who makes the decision or what the criteria is for consolidation. So they've been processed. It's not a change from anything that can't be done, but it's just eliminating a line anywhere in the city. People can remove lines from interior property line. There's nothing that prohibits them from doing that. It's just establishing a process and a criteria for it.
Okay, that's great. And then my other question has to do with, help me understand better. The question is about maximum lot size, but how do I think about that when we have block length, maximum block length? Is that the same thing, or are they different? Are they in different places? How do they interact?
So difference between maximum lot size and block length? Is that, did I understand your
Yeah,
question?
yeah, that's right. I think the question has to do with, should we have a maximum lot size? Is that the question? Going back to.
Yeah, I mean, we're not asking that question. I think there was a public comment on lot consolidations and a potential for lot consolidation to create large homes. And so I think in the public matrix, we captured a response to that to say, if there was a policy discussion about the size of the homes should be limited, or there should be a maximum size of the lots, then those things can occur. But lot consolidation is a separate, it doesn't change policy in terms of maximum lot size or block length size. So block length would be if you have a road, the connectivity between the roads. So the entire block length is 250 feet or something. That if you have a lot that that goes bigger, if you have 5 acres and you're trying to do a subdivision, then you would lay it out so that you have street connectivity where you don't have one road that in and one road out, but you would actually get some sort of a connection that would break up the larger block. The
Great.
maximum lot
That's good.
size, yeah.
That's all I need to know. Just
Okay.
wanted to kind of get that out there. Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Voice. Commissioner Joy Lewis. Thank you for the presentation, Minnie. I had a similar question to Nina about where lot consolidation is allowed as to and how that can work. I think that there is some concerns, less about how we maximize space, but the worry about minimizing space. And if if you are able to buy up a number of properties to be able to then adjust to be able to use the space in a way that might be less efficient, is trying to say how do we anticipate and have some safeguards on that, which I didn't really feel like was present. So I think maybe it's a little bit more of, is this something that staff is still fleshing out? Is my question is kind of, is this something that you feel like is something we'll be seeing improvements on in the second draft? Or
As it relates to lot consolidation
Mhm.
or just use
as
of
yeah,
land and efficient use of land?
as it is with lot consolidation across the city, because as I read it, it can be anywhere. So is there particular places where we want to have maybe more stringent? I'm asking, is staff planning on coming back to us and presenting us with lot consolidation in a different way, or is right now is staff saying this citywide, it can be anywhere is the
Yeah,
policy?
correct. I mean, we're not, I mean, unless you want us to do any kind of analysis, but we're not planning on doing any where lot consolidations can occur, because a lot of, that we would have to know who owns contiguous ownership. I mean, people don't consolidate lots between different ownership, right? So it would have to be one person who owns a, a number of lots that they're trying to eliminate their lot line in between for various reasons. Sometimes they want to add on to their house and there was an old existing line that occurred, and the city would require them to eliminate that line because it creates problems with building code and other things that you have to require the separation. So it's really a mechanical thing to allow this to happen. There isn't a policy change or anything like that associated with lot consolidations. So I
Okay.
don't know if that answers your
Um,
question.
and if I'm reading it correctly, it's the same with zero lot line, right? We're encouraging it everywhere in the city, correct?
We're not encouraging, we're just allowing it and creating a process for it. Yes, it's anywhere in the
Um,
city.
I think in lot 4, you say 0 lot line, shared access lots and alley access lots are encouraged. Yeah. I mean, we use
Yeah,
the
so
word
that's still
encouraged
language
in our
in
in our pack in our
correct,
memo. I will
correct.
say it's not in the code. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where I got it from, right? Is
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
so
So
are
I think
so
what
is
we
it correct?
put
It was 0 lot line across the city, right? Everywhere.
that's up for discussion at this point, you know.
Okay.
So we did put it in there because to achieve the golden outcomes that we shared, you know, that were in that golden outcomes chart. So now the question is, do they make sense everywhere in the city? We heard some public comments that maybe we need to be more thoughtful about where these things are allowed and to preserve the neighborhood character of some of the neighborhoods that perhaps they shouldn't be. So that's really for Planning and Policy Commission to weigh in. Do we want to encourage these anywhere or not?
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my third question then is again about the requirements of open space. Right now you're asking us about multifamily versus single family. But it's what is the staff recommendation right now for we have this 48 feet is like the number that I see, but are we only is this a reduction? Do we what is, currently I believe, if for I think it's an is it an increase right now for multifamily, but it's actually a decrease in single family?
Sure, let me explain that. So right
Thank you.
now, it doesn't seem like a subdivision design standard exists. So if you were platting, there isn't a requirement for open space. A lot of these plats, you know, have occurred, but those have been through development agreements and such where those areas were designated as parks and open space in a more, it wasn't per sort of plat. It was more for an area planning kind of a thing. So when we discuss the natural amenity space or whatever we end up calling it now, you know, the 48 square feet, the discussion was we shouldn't allow balconies to be counted towards common community space. So the balcony should be separate from common open space. Right now, the code is you can choose one way or the other, but you have a minimum of 48 per dwelling unit. Our opinion is that the 48 perhaps makes sense for multifamily, but it doesn't make sense for someone doing a 9-lot short plat. So if you have 4 lots or 9 lots, you at 48, you know, you're going what is going to happen with that community space? You're going to get these small spaces that aren't really usable or maintained. It depends on the homeowner association to really take them on. And so a lot of cities have that higher threshold. If you're doing a subdivision of X number of lots, then you have this sort of open space requirements. And now this we're talking plats versus someone doing an apartment complex, right? So in our opinion, those should be two different. The current code doesn't have a standard for plats. The design section in the plats doesn't exist at this time.
Do you happen to recall, or if our guru Lucy happens to recall what it was when we did have our urban villages in place? I know that there were requirements that were obviously are now defunct and sunsetted, um, to help guide us.
It was 100 square feet per unit at Talus. That was in the original development agreement. It was removed with the First Amendment. That allowed not only just open spaces, but also trails. It was a fairly broad definition. At Issaquah Highlands, in fact, there was no particular standard. What you're probably remembering is we would often present analysis that we had done on various plats and the amount of open space that was provided. In the replacement regs, I believe it was 250 square feet for any new created unit, which was based on some of the analysis that we did. Now, that doesn't mean that was based on existing open spaces in those two urban villages, which may not be applicable outside of them.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that refresher on the history. Thank you. Those are the questions I have.
Well, thank you, commissioners, for all of the great questions. We are ready for deliberation. Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, Chair Voice. Commissioner Nina Milligan here. Thank you again for all this work. I don't really have complaints. You think you guys are doing a great job of listening and doing this work, and it's really complicated stuff. Um, I want to focus my attention on two things: the lot consolidation and the open space requirements. Under lot consolidation, I want to push back a little bit on this because even though it is an interpretation of something that's already there, it is a new thing. And so I want to look at it critically for that reason. Also, because in another context, we were just talking about zero lot lines, and it was requested of us to be thoughtful about where we apply zero lot lines. So why aren't we thoughtful about where we apply lot consolidation? And one of the reasons why this came to my mind as being potentially problematic and something that we might be able to address at this time because we are creating we're fixing something with a new application of something that was already allowed. Um, on Mercer Island, I followed the residential standards updates, and one of the major complaints of the of degradation of neighborhood character came from lot consolidation in residential and single family areas where there was a neighborhood scale, but then it became very large homes with a lack of neighborhood connectivity. So they addressed it in some way. I'm pushing it back to you all to um, maybe try to follow my thought processes where my concerns are. I don't really have any great solutions, but a couple of the goals that I'm trying to track in thinking about being thoughtful about this is that we want to increase density in our city, and we want to encourage affordability. These are things that we've talked about. So how does lot consolidation in residential areas help in those two categories? In fact, it seems like it would not help. Now, it's not that lot consolidation is not appropriate in other places in the city. I can see where we're encouraging mixed use or multifamily or commercial, where lot consolidation would be very helpful to make a viable lot size in order to create a mixed use or a multifamily project. But in our single family neighborhoods, I wonder about the application of that. So I'm just kind of pushing back on that and saying, I think this is where the concerns of mine are coming from. And you've asked again about the open space or natural amenity requirements for multifamily should be applied in the single family. And I don't know, but what's the reason for it? Why do we have this reason? Why do we have this requirement in multifamily? Is it because there's no open space in multifamily because of the density and the FAR of those kinds of projects? Or is it also because the connectivity of our neighborhoods and the quality of life is enhanced when there are shared spaces? Now, why wouldn't a single family neighborhood benefit from shared natural amenities, shared spaces, the way that multifamily do? I guess it kind of depends on what's more important, or what is the most important objective of the natural amenity space or the open space in the multifamily. I don't have an answer for that, but it just seems like it might be just as important in the single family. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Milligan. And while I typically try and hold my tongue until all the commissioners have had a chance to speak, I would echo Nina's concerns because again, well, typically some people might find me as a build baby build guy, which I am. There are areas, again, like I'm thinking of Old Town, where I think lot consolidation could go wrong very quickly. So again, I think some of those concerns are shared, and I think Nina made the point brilliantly. There's areas in the city where there's mixed use, and other areas where I think it's quite appropriate. But definitely some guide rails there would be good. So little piece on that. Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Voice. I want to go ahead and let Commissioner Monahan go because she had actually asked to go for comments. Are you sure? Okay, before we did our questions. I do love going after Nina. I think she very well put some of my concerns. I think that if you had come to us in an off year about lot consolidation, we would have seen this a little bit differently. But when we stack it up with open spaces and with zero lot line, I start to get a little concerned. I get that they're disconnected, but the way that the information was presented to us with zones, I see some problems we could be backing ourselves into, and I think that we might as well fix them while we're here. I think it's very appropriate to ask the question, where is this appropriate? At this point, I do not advocate to have lot consolidation allowed citywide. I think Commissioner Boyce's comments about Old Town is something that we've seen has been a historic problem. And I strongly have issues with allowing zero lot line everywhere throughout the city. I think, again, I think of neighborhoods like South Cove where this could be seriously detrimental to neighborhood character. And then that feeds me kind of right into this kind of discussion about this enhancement of shared spaces. Um, I may come at this from the bias of working in the Highlands on the UVDC, and I will tell you that I saw great benefit from the way we plan communities to be encouraging of neighborhoods interacting together. And I think that to Nina's point of why would we not do it for one type of housing or another. And what my concern is having, while we're trying to address having a wide breadth of housing in Issaquah, it's also important where that housing goes. And if we have developers that are trying to fit what we believe the model is for affordable housing and are missing middle, but then don't allow the same amenities that we find so vital in being able to create community, we're really creating an equity issue. And so, again, maybe if we had looked at these things a little bit differently, but having them all together, I see a lot of problems. And I right now cannot advocate for us having having lot consolidation across the city, having a zero lot line allowed everywhere. And I really think that we need to look and start to see some parity the same way that we talk about requirements for single family homes and duplexes. I think it's very similar to the way that we need to be looking at these open recreation space standards. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't um, require developers to have an HOA in place to be able to have requirements of how things are maintained, right? We require that of all kinds of plantings in the city. So I don't know why we wouldn't also have that for open spaces and natural amenities, even in small requirements, being able to have that those spaces are vitally important for how our communities interact. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Monahan.
Yeah, hi, Matt Monahan. On the lot consolidation piece, I'm reserving judgment, and instead I have two questions that I'd like staff to think about, and that's what can we do and what should we do? On the what can we do, I just want to make sure that if there's any restrictions on lot consolidation, that is consistent with property rights. And so, first understanding how far can we go, and then on the what should we do, and I think this goes to Nina's point. I'd like to benchmark like what are other jurisdictions, where are they falling in the span between most restrictive and least restrictive, and that way we can think thoughtfully about, okay, where do we want to fall within that range of, once the law sets the parameters, okay, then where do we fall within that? On question 3 on the open spaces for short plats, I think I'm against requiring it, and I'm just thinking from an administration perspective. Are you going to have an HOA for 4, 6, 7 homes? I just could see those community spaces being run down after a period of time, particularly if you hate your neighbors. I know we all love our neighbors here, but I used to live East Coast and I hated some of them, and so I wouldn't be, pruning the community garden unless I had to. And then on question 4, on the increasing from 4 to 9, I think I've been relatively consistent in saying yes, if we have the flexibility from state law to kind of increase the number of houses we can put through short plats, and I'm for it. So those were my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Monahan. To see, when you have such eloquent commissioners as we do, you don't have to repeat the brilliance that they already have said. I'm just going to say that, yes, I do agree with Matt on question 4 or 3. No, I'm not in favor of that. And 4, yes, I too trying to be consistent, but no, I do believe raising that threshold to 9 is appropriate. And it's also, I believe it's in line with what the state is. So again, more consistency. And I think sometimes people have the feeling that behind every single builder or developer, there's a monopoly man with a monocle. And we need to be careful because we want to invite builders to come here, because if we continue to make it harder and more difficult, you can be rest assured that it will be a monopoly man with a monocle. So again, I am for that as well. Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Voice. I think that's an apt point when talking about question 4. I do have a concern about raising it to 9. I know that that is the max allowed by the state. That doesn't mean that that's necessarily the right move for our community. I would like to see staff give us their recommendation of this is the number and this is why. I think it's very difficult in code to have this is how many units we need for SEPA. This is how many units you need for outdoor lighting. This is how many you need for this, and it starts to vary. I'd like very much for staff to tell us, we'd like to have it to be at 7 units. We'd like it to be at 6 units. If you propose it to be at 9, I think it needs to be across the board for everything. And there needs to be a consistency in our code, because that's one of the main things that we're trying to do with this Title 18 update is to have, to use Matt's previous word, harmonious. We need to have some consistency in our code that says this is where we consider our threshold of medium to larger scale development. And I think it's difficult when we start to jump around on that number. So if staff greatly recommends that we move up to the maximum allowed, then I'd like to see what that looks like again across the board on all these different places that we have these requirements. Thanks.
Well said. Hear, hear. Commissioner Milligan.
Nina Milligan here. Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. I haven't been able to really get my arms around whether it should be 4 or 9, and so that kind of it keeps coming back to us. So I think that there's some inclination towards 9, but I think the way that Commissioner Lewis put it, in that, and I haven't thought it through. It would be nice to see it. What would it look like if we based lighting standards, SEPA, the short plat, everything at one number? Could you do that? I don't know, but that is the kind of simplification, predictability that I would like to see in Issaquah, so that the real heartfelt, um, purposeful developers could easily come in and deliver the kind of product that we're looking for. So with that in mind, um, would this get us there, or is this just another little piecemeal thing when you have to figure out a different standard for lighting, or whatever, just to make it easier for everybody? I like the idea. I'd love to see how it plays out from Commissioner Lewis's. What if most things were set at 1 unit count and they were all aligned? Can you do it? It sounds good. So I'm just chiming in.
We always appreciate people chiming in. Would anyone else like to chime in? I think the remarks as far as consistency, very important. Again, that is the major goal. So again, I will even take some things that I personally think, and I believe, again, part of our goals and outcomes that even overrides that. So I do believe the consistent part is even more important than my personal wants and needs. Our commission has fallen deathly silent. Would anyone else like to speak on these topics? And does staff feel they have enough information to move forward?
Sure. Let me just summarize so I can be sure that I've captured your discussion for our conversation with council. So in terms of the block length requirements, we didn't quite talk about that. We did have some feedback from the Development Commission at the last meeting about the 250-foot block length requirement. So there was some that perhaps that shouldn't be a requirement in every neighborhood. Is that sort of where all of you are at? I mean, we don't have to put that in the code. That was just our first attempt at this code. I think the pro and con of that was, are we taking the same sort, are we densifying some of the neighborhoods? And really the intent here wasn't to densify, it was more for connectivity and walkability so that you have more of a street connection and not large blocks. So that's one area I think it would be helpful for us to know which way to go. And then I think we heard some zero lot line and all those kind of things perhaps don't make sense in all neighborhoods. So, but where do they, I mean, should we just limit them to Highlands, Talus, and Central Issaquah, and everything else is one area? I mean, where do we split? If it's not everywhere, then where does it make sense to have some of those design standards applied? That would be helpful. I think the other two questions, number 3 about open space, we'll come back with some more additional research on what makes sense, what the thresholds are, some peer city research and all that. The threshold from 4 to 9, we'll look at consistency of lighting, SEPA, and these. But I think the feedback from Development Commission was leaning more towards upping it to 9. 2 of you here feel 9 is okay, and 2 are one's a no, and Nina sort of I'm not sure where we landed on the threshold with you, Nina. But it's somewhat of a mixed thing. We'll do some research in terms of consistency with other thresholds, but primarily the grid pattern or this block length 250 feet and zero lot lines. If we don't want them everywhere in the city, are there certain neighborhoods that we should limit them to? You know, is there any feedback for us related to design standards? That would be helpful.
Okay, well, we have our marching orders commission, but I would like to let Commissioner Lewis go quickly because I'm sure she's going to want to clarify something. Commissioner Lewis.
I do, but Commissioner Nina is before me.
Okay, I just figured you might want to say something about your position because I don't think you were a hard no, but
I wasn't, but let Nina go.
fair enough. Okay.
Okay. Nina Milligan. Yeah, sorry I didn't answer the question about block length. I don't really, without knowing how that would be implemented in an established neighborhood like, say, South Cove or Squawk, as an Issaquah Highlands resident, I live it every day, the benefit of having limited block length for pedestrian and other, multimodal connectivity. And I think that is a really important value to pursue citywide, to unlock all of our neighborhoods and to encourage other modes of transportation through block length. And I wish I could assert it more confidently, but I am not quite sure how we would implement that in existing neighborhoods. What burden would we put on people who want to remodel their home? If they're over 50% remodeling, do they have to tear out part of their lot and turn it into an easement for a block length connectivity? I don't know. That's not what I'm in favor of. So I'd have to know more about how it would be implemented in existing neighborhoods. Thank you.
Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Boyce. I do appreciate Minnie you bringing us that we completely ignored block length. So from the way that I saw it is that it would be onerous in all parts of the city and yet very beneficial in others. And so I think it makes sense to think about the valley floor. I think it makes sense to talk about conditional implementation when we talk about block length because I'm a huge fan of it, but it's very difficult when you live in a vast terrained environment, right? I think we see that in a lot of neighborhoods in Seattle. So I think that we need to talk about a conditional implementation and kind of fine tune and hone in where we think it would be best used. And Commissioner Boyce was right on that. I don't consider myself a straight no. I do think that I need a compelling presentation to increase to the maximum. I think it makes sense to increase it when we talk about the missing middle, but what I'd really like to see is for the city to take a stance and for the administration to say this is the number we think it ought to be, regardless of where it falls on the 4 to 9, and this is what it looks like across the board. And so I think it's hard for me to tell you where I think we should fall on it when we have been just getting pieces and parts. And I think that telling me that it's the maximum allowed by the state isn't necessarily a reason why I would move it. So I hope that clarification helps.
Anyone else like to comment? Minnie, do you feel better about the discussion 5 minutes after?
Sure, yeah. So we'll capture it in terms of your discussion, and we'll come back with the open space and where we think the block land, try to quantify that in terms of where that makes sense or doesn't make sense. We'll give it some more thought on our end. Thank
All
you.
right.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you to staff for those fantastic presentations. Always do a fantastic job. We are through with the meat of the agenda, and now we are going to cleanup mode, batter mode. We are moving on to reports. And I believe Valerie gets to provide the reports tonight.
There are no city council updates for tonight, but we do have a few announcements. So I'm going to hand it over to Lucy.
Thank you. I wanted to announce that this is my last PPC meeting because Tuesday is my last day with the city. And I want to thank you all. I've really enjoyed being a guest and in front of this commission, and really enjoyed what a very engaged and passionate commission you are. So thank you very much.
That wasn't the announcement we were looking for.
May I jump in here really quickly on Lucy's behalf? So I don't know how many of you know, and this really doesn't matter, but I'm going to say it anyway. Lucy and I went to the same high school. We have in Texas, of all things. So we have a bond. And she'll sometimes say she got me the job, but she told me about the job at Issaquah. So we have both been here for a very, very long time. And I would like to thank Lucy publicly for always having my back when we come to PPC. We've both been here so long. I know that she can answer questions that I can't. And so I just have truly appreciated working with her and her dedication to the city and for getting me this job.
Thanks, Kristen. That's very sweet.
Well, wishing you the best, Lucy, wherever you do end up. I know I could probably speak for everybody on the commission that will miss you and the fantastic work that you provide and the great explanations. And yeah.
Can I,
Find
Chair
out.
Boyce, can I jump in? Because
Absolutely.
ever since I came to Issaquah, Lucy has
Now's
been
the
my
time to
guiding
pile on.
light and worked through and really I credit Lucy with so many of the lovely qualities that we have in our urban villages and the design formats that we are going forward with. I don't know how we would do these without you, Lucy. It's a legacy that you should really be proud of. I live it in my, my little courtyard here at Star Point. It's just one of them. So now you'll have time to come up maybe and see me here. But God, I can't imagine doing this without you. Thankfully, you have provided a lot of leadership to the city of Issaquah and have developed other people in the staff who will help continue the work that you have laid out. I'm really mad at you for announcing this in public because now I'm so disappointed you'll be going. But thank you for giving me this opportunity to thank you in public.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, that was sad. So no more sad announcements.
No more sad announcements. Just one more quick announcement. So as a reminder, in-person meetings have been pushed back to July. So before we go back to in-person meetings, the clerk's office and the city attorney would like commissioners to participate in a public records training. So a meeting invitation has been sent out for a special meeting on June 2nd. So during this meeting, we'll also be reviewing and discussing updates to the commissioner's rules and regulations. So if you haven't received that meeting notice, please reach out to Stephen. And that is the last item.
Fantastic job tonight, Valerie.
Thank you. Thank you for making it a smooth ride.
And to Lucy, I'm sure you're still on there. Well done. I think that's it. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add for the good of the order? All right, hearing none. I adjourn the meeting at 8:15. Good night, everyone.
Good night.